I mean, just to touch on the like anarchist ML thing, I remember we talked, that was like maybe 4 months ago when I was like, do you label yourself anything? And you're like, don't do that shit. And I'm so glad I talked to you about that when I did, because especially when it comes to creating content, I can see how antithetical that is, or how easily it would be to get swept up in wanting to maybe not actively, but like placate to a certain audience.
Welcome to One Dime Radio. I am your host, One Dime, and you are about to listen to an interesting podcast I did with YouTube extraordinaire Noah Samsen. You may recognize Noah Samsen as the guy who looks kind of like a mixture of Joseph Stalin and the Pringles guy. You may have heard of Noah Samsen from the famous video he did called A Practical Guide to Leftist YouTube, in which he talked about a bunch of educational content creators, including myself, One Dime, and discussed the overall complex world of leftist YouTube. Ever since then, Noah and I have been chatting back and forth about leftist YouTube, the experience of being a content creator, leftist theory, among other things. In this podcast, while we talk about a bunch of things, such as the communist pipeline, the main topic of discussion is how to reach quote-unquote normal people, and overall introduce people to leftist ideas in an accessible way. Now, before getting straight into it, if you are new here, definitely check out my main channel, One Dime, where I make leftist video essays and mini-documentaries on a wide variety of issues. And I also do my political education podcast here, One Dime Radio, which I highly recommend subscribing to if you haven't already. Now, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Noah Samsen, who are you?
Who are you, One Dime? What's up, dude?
How'd you find me? That's the real question. Because that's how we linked up, right?
Yeah, I think
in your video,
I was doing the video on LeftTube, like kind of I made like this guide thing, and I don't remember. I think it was Meme Warfare, the video that I found, and it might have been on the Breadtube subreddit, or I don't know if you ever posted on there, but that's where I found some people. Maybe. Might have been posted there by somebody else, but yeah, and then I just went through your stuff. I was like, oh, this shit's great, because I don't know anyone like that does kind of editing intensive stuff like you, like After Effects and stuff, and so I was like, this is dope, and then. Yeah, put you into the guide, and here we are on the One Dime podcast.
I saw your video kind of randomly because I saw people on Twitter retweeting it, some people who I follow. And then I clicked on it. I was like, oh, cool. Maybe I'll discover some nice creators. And I see at the very end, I'm like, oh, that's me.
Oh,
nice.
Wow, cool.
And I think at the time when I watched your video, you were at like 3,000 subscribers or 4,000 subscribers, something very small, and then it like took off insanely. Did you expect that video to blow up like it did? Now it's like 700,000 views.
Yeah, I had a feeling, just because I didn't know of anyone that had done something like that before, I had a feeling going in that the algorithm would kind of piece it together, because like using other creators' photos in the thumbnail or just like their actual profile pictures, and then having everything listed in the description, and then people liking to hear about their own creators, and like, I mean, I don't know, I liked everybody that I put into it, so I was like, this shit's awesome, and then anyone that watches anyone that they really like, they're like, yeah, they are awesome, I like this, good job. And so I had a feeling it would do well, at least like it would connect between audiences, but I didn't think it would do as well as it did. But yeah, after that, the channel just kind of started growing, and a little bit of imposter syndrome, but you know, we'll take it, I guess. I don't know.
It's good karma, I guess, because you know, a lot of the thing I think a lot of people don't like about like very big creators is they don't shout people out. They don't really use their platform to like help young creators or small creators, and it's always the smaller creators, I find, who are more likely to like, you know, help each other out and stuff.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's because you're in the same boat. And so maybe there's like reciprocal karma in the universe. So like there's that, but there's like a handful of bigger creators like the Eyeball Zone and stuff like that are little things that I think are cool.
He's one of the few people that really plugs new creators. He's really dope. I like Thought Slime.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, classic. Yeah, and it is interesting too because now since that video blew up, you've sort of almost, I don't know if you'd accept his label, but you've like kind of grown into like the referee of leftist YouTube in a certain sense, like in a certain sense, because at least like what people might call Breadtube. I use the word Breadtube is more specific because there's leftist YouTube is really big. But like Breadtube tends to be the people who more like they do like commentary as well, or they tend to also like film themselves, stuff like that. There's a certain aesthetic when it comes to Breadtube, and you've gotten sucked into a lot of drama, and you found yourself recently, I noticed, being able to bring a lot of people who might otherwise be in like a commentary space into the LeftTube space. That's might not be true, but that's how I see it. Like I think your channel previously, prior to your video, it looked like it would have been something like the channel Gokanaru or or commentary stuff, if that makes sense. You edited for Noel from Tiny Meat Gang, right?
Yeah, I still do weekly videos. Yeah, those guys are like him and Cody are like the blueprint for commentary YouTube, and I come from like watching and experiencing that side of YouTube. So a lot of like everything that I've done leading up to discovering LeftTube was like commentary. It was like you find something weird, you show it on the screen, you cut back to you and you say something, silly. You make fun of somebody, and it's usually like everybody kind of gets what's going on. It's pretty simple. And just in my last video, I kind of trial by fire discovered how horrible that like approach is when it comes to like putting it into a context where you're supposed to have serious arguments and like have like essay structure. But like in the commentary, like YouTube is dominated by the commentary world. Like just off the top, like the Curtis Connor, like Drew Gooden type of creators that will put out a video and get like 2 million views in a day. And there's definitely more structure to those. Like they rely on like humor and I think like the editing is big as well, but it's less argumentative as a video essay. But also the video essays are growing.
Political too. Like it's just
yeah, totally. It's there's like undertones, like everyone will make a video on Fresh and Fit, the podcast that like it's a manosphere type podcast, like men's advice, but they're just misogynist, and so there's undertones of not activism, obviously, but like, hey, these guys are sexist. Sexism is bad. It's like, okay, I mean, that's a start. That's a start.
It's kind of like almost like the reversal of like the anti-SJW movement, because there was that big anti-SJW movement where a lot of people in commentary, like H3, that's he's actually the only one I remember. And yeah, Cody, of course, Cody and Noel from Tiny Meat Gang, as they'd make fun of like, people who might be like often there would be some people who are described as like SJWs who might be stand out among the others, might be like the lowest common denominator, like the outliers. Yeah, they'll use like a couple of bad cases and they'll dunk on that. That was a big phenomenon for a while. Obviously less extreme with the commentary people, it was more like overtly political with the anti-SJW YouTube, like the Ben Shapiro's of the world, all that shit. Now it's kind of like the reversal. You have a lot of people, including commentary people, dunking on what I would call the low-hanging fruit of the right, like Fresh and Fit. Fresh and Fit might not be like I don't know if they're like political or what, but like they seem kind of like the equivalent of a right-wing, easy to dunk on person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like. That's an interesting point because like I did a video a while ago on these guys that were on TikTok that were like misogynist. I perceive them to be misogynist because they were saying weird stuff about just like dating advice that was really like sexist, or interviewing people on the street and trying to make women look bad and stuff like that. And one thing I noticed when I made this video, and my video was kind of going after the low-hanging fruit, like dunking on them, like making jokes where everybody kind of understood the context that these guys were, sexist. is that you get an influx of people that don't understand that they're sexist, and then because you're not like clearly kind of going through the problem with what they're seeing, they like lash out at you and they're like, fuck this, like this is bad content. Not even from like all the haters are like commenting on my shit. It's more like they just don't get it. And that's like a clear difference that in approach than someone like a ContraPoints who will like lay it all out in a manner that even if, someone who is a sexist stumbles upon the video, they'll be able to get through it and at least understand. And so it's not that these things are like diametrically opposed. They're just different, and the crossover can be like a little bit iffy at times, but definitely like I remember you mentioned H3, the humongous clip, you remember that? That was like
that's the classic one everyone remembers.
Yeah. The it's just that, and I could see it being in reverse. I also think like I think you don't get away with shit as easily. I don't know though, actually. I'm not sure. I mean, they still use Big Red in every thumbnail. Like those, I don't know who, like Amazing Atheist type guys. I don't know. I guess he's not as bad anymore, but they still like, draw on the aesthetic of the anti-SJW, but I don't think it's like,
well,
it's definitely
Amazing
different.
Atheist, the anti-Christian was the original anti-SJW to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
I remember as far back as like Bill Maher. In many ways, I remember Bill Maher when he was like trolling the Tea Party. He was in like Christian fundamentalists. I respect that content to a certain extent, and then to another extent, that kind of content, it just picks a little bit on like the lowest hanging fruit, and it tries to like portray that whole movement like that. Even though obviously like the fundamentalist Christians, by and large, are a lot more wacky than like quote unquote the people that might be grouped in with SJWs or whatever. But what I like about your content is you didn't really only stick to dunking on the low-hanging fruit, because you kind of went more and more political with your content, like over explicitly political, from not just obviously talking about the leftist creators, which, promoting commie tubers, that's a big deal. Like most commentary people don't do that. They don't step in that arena, which I respect a lot, because this is what we need to do to a certain extent. We have to get past only dunking on the obvious idiots that everyone can see are wrong, and kind of getting, okay, why are they wrong? What are they a symptom of? And you do that with like talking about larger systemic issues with the housing video, which I liked a lot. It's probably my favorite video on your channel, actually, the landlord video. So like, what made you want to go that overtly political? Because that's kind of a risk for a lot of commentary channels. I feel like I don't know if you even consider yourself a commentary channel anymore, but one who might have started off as that. It's a big risk. I notice a lot of people, some who I actually know and have talked to, they're like afraid of doing content that explicitly political, because it's a risk of, alienating an audience, alienating the quote unquote normies. I guess when people say normies, they mean different things. What I think of it as is just anyone who's not political, anyone who's not that political is a normie.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what made you want to, take that risk?
I kind of stumbled into the political stuff when I found other political YouTubers that were making really good content, and I saw the way they were doing it, and I saw how like engaging it was, and it did make me think like, okay, like if I can work my way towards doing things like that, then that would be, I don't like, without having to like remove the comedy and entertainment elements. Like if I could do that, that would be really cool. Cause I always have, like, I guess since around Bernie, probably like a little before Bernie, I was into it. Like I got into like leftist politics with Chapo, Trap House. And, so I've always like thought about it, but my understanding has always been like somewhat surface level. Like I've done a little reading up until I started wanting to produce, kind of get more into making left-leaning content. But yeah, I never thought about it as an alienation thing, because for me it's like, if I want to make something and I like tell people that I'm a communist in the video, if they like unsubscribe, I'm not like worried about, like, the alienation thing is like I guess it's like a maximum threshold thing. So like if I wanted to grow as fast as I can, become huge, make a lot of money, I could just like TikTok, react, like do like don't touch politics, just like do like common, like I guess like sort of liberal like posturing against
dunking
like
on Fresh and Fit.
Yeah, exactly. So like I could do that over and over and over again. But I think that would, I mean, I wanted to get more into like learning about this stuff and like trying to see what I can sort of, if I can get good enough talking about it to be able to like relay it to bigger audiences. And so like if I, you know, if I get into things that are alienating for some people, I know at the same time, you know, you're building up a separate space that might not be as established of people that are like into it. And it's always going to be smaller and more niche, but I mean, I find it interesting. So I guess that's the full answer.
That's way more respectable, to be honest, just because being afraid of alienating one's audience is a huge thing on YouTube, not just leftist YouTube, but like with, you know, as we said, with a lot of commentary channels who are afraid to alienate one side or the other, but even niche leftist YouTube channels. I've seen many channels go down the path of labeling themselves as like a very specific micro tendency, like for example, anarchist, Marxist, Leninist, etc. Very specific tendency. And then they're almost afraid to deviate from that line. And they're afraid to like criticize anything in that politics. And it's almost like a brand. It becomes a new consumer brand where they are geared towards, instead of like, it might start off right as quote unquote radicalizing people, introducing people to new perspectives, sharing one's opinions, to sort of feeding like an audience, like a consumer demographic, almost like a producer to product relationship. I've seen it happen many times. Which is actually why when I was talking with you privately about like why I don't use political labels other than like communists, obviously, but like I don't use, or socialists if I'm talking to the, you know, less initiated.
Yeah, easier scared off.
Communism is just a scary word. People are less scared about socialism for some reason. You know, probably because people think socialism is when the government does stuff.
Many do think that, yeah.
But yeah, it's generally when people adopt any sort of brand, like I make this content, it's like it becomes feeding that same echo chamber almost. And what I think is brilliant, and I think is really hard to do, is to get audiences of people who normally would not be exposed to like, I don't know, radical thought, and to kind of slowly, because people, you can't come off straight out the gate and say, you know, here is lesson on Marxist Leninist theory.
Today we're doing chapter 3 of blah, like, yeah. People do it. We know a lot of people do it, but you can't, if you want it to like content, like if you want it to succeed, there's definitely a dichotomy there between really smart theory folks and being successful at YouTube. That's sort of, there's a break in the chain somewhere. No disrespect, because I love all the channels, but it might just be a consequence of the medium. But yeah, I see what you're saying about like working it in a manner that's still palatable and more broad, like
you gotta
more generally accepted. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
I mean, and you do that at an even more accessible level than I do. Because you reach the audience that I really would not be able to reach, which I find, because mainly I feel like the type of content you do is very image based, number one. So like people might, you know, often people come for the personality and stick for the content. And some people come for the content, stick for the personality. I feel like you're the former. So which you do well, because, you know, some people might have clicked on your video. Who knows, like they might have clicked on your video about Ben Shapiro and transphobia, and they might have stayed for the housing one, right? And I think it's a good way to, there's some, you do what a lot of channels, I wish a lot of commentary or former commentary channels would do. Like I really wish they would do that, because it's a way of using a platform, and you also reaching a certain type of audience who might not otherwise be exposed to this. You know, there's a lot of channels who make content in form that's similar to yours, in form, but like not as political. I know there's people like Tiffany Ferguson. Mm-hmm. There's only one person actually who I think does stuff very similar to yours. Obviously, very different in like humor and stuff. But I forget her name. French girl.
Alice.
Alice Capel. Yeah.
Alice is great.
She does stuff like that. Like, it's in the commentary end, right? But it's gets political, and it brings that in. And I think that's a niche that I would like to see like more people do, because it captures a wide audience and it disseminates ideas accessibly, which I think is good. Do you find that hard though to like I don't know, make some of these things digestible, because you not so subtly almost like promote communism in your housing video about like, because it's one thing to say, oh, we should tax the rich, we should do something about inequality, transphobia is bad, rich people are getting too rich. A lot of people can agree on that. It's another thing to say like abolish landlords.
Yeah.
Right. Which I agree with, by the way. I fully support. But like that's a hard point to like persuade a lot of, regular Americans.
Yeah, I mean, that's the primary demographic is like, kind of 18 to 24 to 30, like white middle class Americans that like, I guess will generally fall under the label of liberal. And so ideas like you said, tax the rich and whatever else kind of general, like palatable political content. But yeah, like part of the thing is, as I've started doing this, I don't want to speak on things I don't fully understand. And so like, there's a threshold of like how much of the theory like my own political journey, trying to reflect it. And I am in a period right now where I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, just like go check out these other YouTubers that know their shit, that know the theory, but like we shouldn't shy away from these labels because it'll alienate some people. Because at the end of the day, I think like the end goal has to be something greater than just like, again, not that that's what, greater than kind of palatable anti-capitalism. And I think like when it comes to the accessibility, I think that's less of an intention thing, more as a product of like trying to figure out how this YouTube video can be the most successful. So how can I brand it and present it with the title, thumbnail, and just the presentation of the content in a way that will make it the most successful? And then if in doing that, like if I start with an idea or a concept or something I find, and it's like, I'm like, okay, I'll talk about this landlord, then I'll go into like housing in a kind of more serious manner. Then it's not like I go in thinking, how can I make it palatable? I just make it as like widely acceptable as possible. And then if there's like theory undergirding that or like sort of further left thought, then that's great. And I want to try and do that like more and more. But it also has to fall in line with my own political journey and my understanding. Cause like I know I could see myself falling into the pitfall I probably already have of speaking on things just because they sound good, but I don't know them. And that's kind of like,
trust me, you're not nearly as guilty of that as like a lot of the people like, debate bro streamers who are kind of the quintessential example of that. Because, there's a saying, right? Like the smart person knows that they don't know much. Right. And there's like the Dunning-Kruger effect that people who tend to overestimate their abilities tend to, actually be a lot less smart. And I think that you have that a lot going on with these streamer people, because they just by being on a screen for a super long time talking and doing a lot more talking than reading is going to lead to people echoing dumber takes. So, I mean, the fact that you're already avoiding that is good, because yeah, I mean, it's good to, promote like what you have it be in line with your political journey, right? But then there's some people, right, who will make like big assumptions about history, about other groups, other tendencies. You have that with the streamer community. I mean, that's just the principle I wish everybody would abide by, like
don't speak on things you don't. Yeah.
Like you don't have to be an expert. Like you don't have to write a dissertation, but like, read a couple books on it. I don't know, a couple articles.
Yeah,
Smarties.
For sure. I get like given the nature of the content, like not only is that kind of actively discouraged because you're just doing stuff on the fly, someone says something, you respond, you like a lot of them posture as being the truth understander, not the truth, like as knowing their shit politically. And then if they don't, like, I think what's happened time and time again is they will double down over and over because it's good for the content. Because if you can kind of argue your way around whatever, I guess an example is like Marx and Engels would have voted for Biden. Like that's a take that like was doubled down upon. And I understand why.
I think it was Lenin would have voted for Biden, which is even more insane.
Yeah. No. So that was like doubled down, and like on some level, I get why that would be done, because you are carving out a niche of kind of, you know, like left liberal like Americans that will gravitate towards the message of like, well, we don't want Trump out, so we want Biden, so like presenting it this way is probably fine. But then that obviously conflicts with, you know, the theory tube that is like, actually, what the fuck are you talking about? Or just any kind of like generally read like person. But at the same time, you understand why that happens, because it's incentivized. Like you know, like the however many streams and videos that like the streamer got out of that was like that, like extremely valuable for them. So it's a distortion. It's like, it's where you get to that point of how is this content affecting the politics, and how are these things, is there a disconnect between a political movement or a sort of broad movement of political thought online to the fact that the content has to be successful? And I worry about that with my own stuff, like how I'm presenting things, and if I'm allowing the branding and presentation to get in the way or to distort anything. And I think I have done that in the past, and I'm kind of trying to learn from that. But definitely there's a certain space that really incentivizes, like, not bad take. I guess when you have a bad take, doubling down on that bad take, and then not having time to consult the literature except the Google search.
I think too, because like with an increased audience and increased clout comes an increased ego. And when people get, you know, maybe outed for their bad takes, instead of maybe, you know, taking in some of that criticism, doing some reading, the incentives of the platform that, you know, incentivizes immediacy, as well as, you know, just the psychological nature of like having an image and a brand, it kind of like encourages the person to just double down on the ignorance. And I see that all the time, right? Is because it's, you know, it takes one to swallow their pride to, like, you know, accept that, oh, maybe I'm wrong on this, maybe I'll correct on this, but you don't see that as often. But yeah, like regarding what you were saying before about the sort of line between the theory tube and also making just a video like accessible, because by nature to have a video successful in terms of views and recommendation, you need to appeal to a lot of people as much as possible, and also to hold their attention as long as possible with the watch time. So with that, there's a fine line that comes with, okay, let's make this very information heavy, dense, and let's, you know, like throw in a lot of humor, maybe throw in a little spectacle, right? A lot of people are like, spectacle sells, like, you know, drama content sells, and that's why so many people do it.
Yeah.
Is, you know, if it only becomes about the spectacle, I think it's pretty much pointless. But if it's like a little bit of it to attract a bigger audience, to then, for lack of a better term, Trojan horse a lot of, you know, important bits in there, I think that can be a smart tactic. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm really learned how to do that yet. But I mean, when I started out, I started out much more theory tube. And then as I did more videos, I started thinking like, okay, if I want to expand, I'm going to have to like make this palatable. So I started, you know, doing that more with like thumbnails, titling, and generally like trying to make stuff a little bit more accessible. Yeah. You know, it's still very like information heavy. If you've watched my content, And also like visually accessible, because you liked meme warfare, right? Like I appreciated you like meme warfare. A lot of people didn't like that video because it's very aesthetically, well, I don't know if they didn't like it, but a lot of people, like, it didn't get the best watch time because it was aesthetically very, very inaccessible. Like I like, very experimental aesthetics. That was probably the most complicated video I ever edited in my life.
Yeah, it looked like it. And you told me after that you did it in After Effects too. I was like, oh my god! It's like I'm sorry for your CPU and for your probably like concentration. That must have been so much work.
Yeah, no, that was about like 2 months in the making. It was pretty insane. Just like, yeah, but 2 months editing, and but also like, I don't do this full time, so that there's also that involved, so it's like a side job. But yeah, with experimental aesthetics, the people who know how to edit well, like you, can appreciate that. For a lot of people you have to you can't, like, experimental stuff, like experimental music to a certain extent. Not everyone's gonna like Death Grips
yeah
or stuff like that. Like, but some people will really appreciate it. But if you want something to be accessible to a wide majority or a large amount of people, you need to kind of make it accessible, but at the same time keep the quality. And you're still obviously fantastic fucking editor, like in terms of
Thank you.
At least like little like snip edits and like the meme edits. I noticed that stuff. Yeah, but it's a fine line that's hard to bridge. I think probably why you find it easier to, toe that line in a very successful way is probably because you're new to leftism to a certain extent. So like you're kind of sharing this information as you're learning it. Whereas a lot of people who will start YouTube, like they'll be very deep into the theory already, and they find as you get like deeper into it, it's actually harder to explain to regular people. So
right.
Probably that helps, I would guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. I would 100% agree. I come from like the content world. Like I was a video editor for a long time. I like started in music videos and stuff. So although I was always like slightly politically motivated and stuff, it never extended really beyond like support for Bernie. But now that I'm I'm entering a space where I want to learn more, then it's kind of like the inverse. Like you're saying, like heavy into theory people are learning how to expand outward with their content. Like ideally, some aren't, and that's totally fine. Like another aspect of this is like it would be ideal for the popular commentary YouTubers that are maybe like slightly political to get more political, and it would be ideal for the really theory heavy channels to get better at making content, or like better at like algorithmically successful content. But at the same time, there are like ways that those things don't have to happen. Like people can keep doing whatever they're doing. Obviously improving and stuff is never hurts, but there are ways that like audiences are transferred. So like just the YouTube algorithm, like you get done watching I guess Nick Is Not Green is another channel that like will touch on kind of left-leaning stuff.
I was gonna say that your channel seemed like it started off kind of like Nick Is Not Green and then got progressively more political, even though he's pretty political, but you got more like into the weeds of stuff, which I appreciate a lot. Like you got like with the housing video and like the LeftTube stuff.
Yeah. His is more like the kind of the commentary style, but there's definitely elements of it. And so like you could get done watching that video and then end up on my channel, or end up on like a video essays channel, or end up on like Hassan, like, or even Vosh, like all of the major content players like in that regard are connected because it's just general left-leaning stuff. And so through that you can get people, if you stumble, I'm trying to think of like a really good like entertaining theory based video. Like I'm really deferential to people like Sean, I guess his isn't necessarily theory based, but like his biggest video, the bell curve.
I appreciate people like Sean, but I fucking hate his videos.
Really?
Because, like the content are good, but I just hate I'll be straight up.
Too dry.
I'm super envious of Sean because he like doesn't edit at all.
Yeah.
It's like a skull the whole time. Like information, it's all good. Like but fuck, man. How did he blow up?
Dude, like you saw his Harry Potter video. Has like 2 million.
I've seen his like old videos from like back in the day, like about the Roman Empire and all that shit.
Yeah. So his latest video, Harry Potter, like it just goes over like all of the weird wrong shit about the Harry Potter books at the movies and different things. And he had, I think, like under 500,000 subscribers when he released it, and it got like 2 million views in like a week. And it's just, I mean, it's the same thing. It's a photo of a skull, and he's talking this stuff through, and he's like laying out the premises, and then like occasionally an image will pop up. But there's something there, I think, that I think is like starting to be discovered. I think like
he's also early to the game. Like he was one of the first like LeftTube.
Right, but I'm saying specifically this, like in this case, a video getting 2 million views in the course of a week for a channel with 500,000 subscribers is pretty absurd. Like I think it had 1.5 million in like 2 days, which is insane. And what I think what's there is like
300
watch time. Yeah,
a lot of money.
Yeah, for a 2-hour video. But like there's something there about watch time. So like the engagement, obviously watch time is the most important metric right now. And the fact that it's a like really clear essay, like it's really argued well. And also I find him very funny in a really dry kind of way. And so I think like another creator that's an example that you don't even really have to be like making jokes all the time is Sarah Zed. She's like an essayist, and she's another person that'll get 2 million views on a video because she talks for an hour, but she's like very clear, concise with the points, and like making something that's engaging, and that it's like building and coalescing. And it's like, I guess it's like basically good writing will take you a long way, and it's starting to be picked up by like the algorithm, as the algorithm is saying like, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter how sort of exotic or like
it's also the topics. I think the topics matter more, because like, right off the bat, like Harry Potter, that's, as accessible as a pop culture medium you can get.
Totally.
To a certain extent. So it's a big part of it's the cultural thing. So a lot of people who might not otherwise be attracted to political stuff might click on that because they'll be like, oh, Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, I want a critique of that. They'll click on it, So yeah, a big part of it definitely, I think, has to do with that whole
totally
content, the personalization, which is why, like, it's probably not a coincidence that my first video, which is my shittiest video, it's good, it's well written, but like terribly, I edited that shit in iMovie. It was called the
Jake Paul video
of Jake Paul. Yeah. And it's because of Jake Paul, dude, like it got like 20,000 views, and for like a channel, like that was my first video. Like, and I think it's because it's Jake Paul. You know what I mean? A big part of that has to do with that content.
Topic selection.
I find that hard though. Like I find that so increasingly hard to like find how to do that. But it's definitely a skill. I mean, there's different roles of LeftTube. I think if we look at it like this, there's different like roles, and there's different parts of the pipeline, if you want to call it a pipeline, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because people's life ideological journey is a pipeline.
Totally.
To a large extent, right?
Yeah.
So you can look at like certain channels as gateway channels, right?
Right.
To a certain extent, you might even play that role, like as a gateway channel, in the sense that like, a lot of people who clicking it might not be that political, might be like new to leftism, sympathetic to leftism, right? They might be like, I don't like these right wingers. And you might guide them to like leftist channels who are, talking about these issues in greater depth, as opposed to some people who may only talk about like, the surface, and the viewers will be left off, I don't know, being like a Rachel Maddow type person, where they, it's only chud dunking, it's only like vote Democrat, blah blah blah, but you're Trojan horsing them to the radical end, which is, I think that's a role. And there's obviously like people like Sean do that too, in a very different way, but it's like a role in the pipeline. And then when you get to the fucking end, you have like the overt commie theory to people of different types, right? The Marxist-Leninists, the theory types. If you want to go to like Marxist-Leninists, someone like Hakim probably is like at the far end.
Yeah.
And maybe like, I don't know.
Zoe Baker.
Yeah, Zoe Baker is like a person who on the anarchist end who might be, like a good channel. Stuff like that. Yeah. So I see it as and I would also probably include myself kind of closer to the theory tube.
Yeah.
End. Although I'm trying to like branch out a little bit. I'm more aiming to what, Ugopnik's doing, which is like theory tube, but like kind of accessible.
Yeah. Like funny, kind of entertaining.
Yeah. I like to make stuff funny too.
For sure. I was going to say, wait, what was I going to say? One sec.
Was it about like the Trojan horse gateway?
It was about the pipeline. Oh yeah. So I was going to ask, what is the end of the pipeline? Like, what is the outcome? Is it getting people to learn about theory? Is it getting people to organize? Like, both. Yeah, both. Who's doing? Is anyone doing both? Because I guess there's a handful of channels that I can think of that. I mean, most of the like theory focused all like have reading list sources and push towards like getting people into the theory. But like in terms of real political action, is there a significant part of that pipeline that actually works? Like that's a functioning, join your local whatever. Like, yeah, because that's one space that I think I don't even know if it can be connected in a broad sense.
There's definitely a void of that. But
there's like a strong hard cut, but I'm not sure. Maybe there's more to it.
My take on this is a little bit different than a lot of leftists. But I'll say like there's what a lot of channels might do is they might say, okay, join your local organization, join a party, do stuff like that. But Paul Morin is really big, or I don't know if he still goes by that anymore. I think it's the Marxist Paul.
Marxist Paul, yeah.
Yeah, he's very big on the organizing side. He's very, practical when it comes to stuff like that. And we definitely need more of that. But what I'll say is I also have like a bit of a critique of actionism in the sense that like, okay, I wouldn't fault a lot of like the leftist YouTubers for not, being very sophisticated in organizing. I personally am not, also because I live in Canada, so I don't know most of my audience is an American, so I don't know what to recommend for organizations. So there's that too. But I usually, my advice is usually like join a party, join people where you have like-minded, people who are into the same causes, stuff like that, mutual aid. But what I would say is like at this stage, we have to really recognize where the left is. The left is a very like new thing in America and North America as a whole. Because really the Cold War and McCarthyism completely decimated communism and socialism. Anything really associated with anti-capitalism was complete. You couldn't even use the word socialism in the early 2000s. You couldn't even use the word capitalism. If you use the word capitalism, you'd be branded as some sort of radical commie. You had to use the word, I'm anti-corporate. That was like the big thing in the early 2000s. So we have to recognize the left is at a new thing. So we should organize, but like we should have like a certain idea of what that means, because in my opinion, organizing also just means spreading the ideas and growing the movements. It doesn't mean like we shouldn't expect change to happen right now, because it's not. Yeah. To have any change, you need what I would call a large minority, not even a majority, a large minority, like maybe 30% of the population, 25% of the population needs to be sympathetic to socialism. And even more needs to at least not hate socialism. Like, let's be real. Most of the people in the world are not going to be like, get that political. It never happens in history, like where the majority of people get super political. There's always going to be a big people who are just like, I just want to grill. A lot of people don't have time for this shit. Right. Yeah. So we need to at least get those people. We need to get those people to like not hate us. And that right now, there's still a lot of people who hate that. There's a lot of people who think, socialism, communism is like totalitarianism, Stalin, 100 million
no
dead,
food,
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
no food.
Yeah.
So we need to like, first of all, we need to win the ideological war to a certain extent. Because let's be real. Imagine if Trump ran in 2008 against Obama, he would have got decimated.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Trump was able to win in 2016 because the current was already laid there for him. Like you had like this, not just on the internet, but you had like the Tea Party. The Tea Party, I would say, was the precursor to that. The right wing ideology, these talking points that were kind of like xenophobic, right wing populist stuff, like American exceptionalism, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
We need to set the terrain. So what I think, like, our goal is we need to like be good propagandists. And when I say to organize, I actually mean like that's just another form of propaganda, because online we'll access a lot of young people or maybe mid 30s or people who are online, but there's a lot of people who we won't access, like maybe our neighbors, maybe people in our communities. And that's where like organizing can be good, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think. We should be pro organizing, but we need to like be real as to what that goal is, because too many people think like, oh, strike now, general strike. Oh, run for a third party. Like none of that shit's gonna work. Like at this rate, you need to build a movement first, and to build a movement, we can't expect like direct results. We need to build it before we get any results, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so, I don't know if that helps answer your question. It's kind of like.
That's a really good answer. I never kind of considered that, because I guess in the back of my mind, like when I'm learning about it, I'm like, okay, so we got like content that's apolitical, content that's like slightly weaves in themes, and then you get further down, and then what's the end? Like, what are we trying to get people to do? And my answer in the back of my mind has always been like read theory and organize, but like it's a great point that if the movement isn't like more generally accepted in a kind of wider context, then, like if every single LeftTube viewer right now went to their local DSA chapter, that would do nothing. Like I never really considered that, but that's a great point that like there has to be, maybe it wouldn't do nothing. I mean, I don't mean nothing, but I mean like installing socialism. No, like obviously not. So yeah, that's a really good point. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Like strikes, right? Like we need for a mass strike to really work. If it's not like there's a difference between like a industry specific strike in a company versus like a general strike. That we saw a lot of pre World War II and during the Great Depression, and even up till like the 1960s and 70s. Stuff like you need to have a population that's sympathetic to that. Whereas if you talk to the average person, there's a very mixed opinions on strikes. A lot of people say, why don't they just go home? Why don't they just go to work? We need to get to a point where you have a lot of the public sympathetic to this stuff. Because yes, as you said, the goal should be to get more people to, read theory, to organize. But there will be a large part of the population who that just will never be the case.
Yeah.
For either like intellect and also just time. A lot of people might have the intellect, but just don't have the time because they're, working 9 to 5s all the time. People are tired when they come home. They rather watch, I don't know, they rather watch like Euphoria instead of read theory, right? So there's that. A lot of that is going to be like hard to change. But so to a certain extent, some people might like watch your videos, they might watch ContraPoints, they might stay there. That's fine. As long as they're sympathetic to the ideas, that's good for the majority of the population. But then the people who should be reading theory are the people who want to organize. Because if you want to organize, I think or maybe join a party, be like politically active, it really helps to read theory, because then you learn from history, you see past mistakes. Because like people who get too deep into like overtly political stuff and don't read any theory, you get like Vosh. That's like the consequence. You have like a totally like very not well thought out politic. Or on the other hand, you'll get like I hate the word tanky, like because it's been misused, but like the type of people who are running around with like Stalin and Mao avatars and shit. And let's be honest, like they're not going to be taken too seriously. And
we're a little ways away from that being a sort of a method of recruitment. Like, I was just thinking about voting Republican, but I just saw this Mao avatar and I was like, who's that guy? And I looked him up. He's dope. It's like I see what you mean. Like there are extremes on either end for sure.
We need like good PR. Like we seriously need good PR, because you see even obviously it's easy to think because we're on the left, we're socialists, we have like the correct goals, we're more morally correct, whatnot. So like
we have the evidence.
We don't have to be good like propagandists, but we do, because perception is everything. People are completely guided by the way things are framed. That was the whole message of the meme warfare video, is that like literally perception is reality, framing is reality. It's completely the image medium, right? You're not going to listen to like a good argument unless you're already like you're already like going to be open to it. For a lot of people, they hear the word like communism, socialism, whatever, they shut that shit down. You know, so or they won't even look at it in the first place. So we need to like, you know, have that, I guess, good PR, because you don't even Nazis, okay, fascists, they don't go around running like wearing like swastikas or fucking they don't wear brown shirts, you know. Yeah, like they try to rebrand themselves as, I don't know, like they wear suits and they call themselves identitarians, or social nationalists, or some shit like that. And yeah, obviously, like it's easy to think we're not like those bad people, so we don't have to, you know, be clever with our marketing, but we do. There's a lot of people think socialism, like, you know, is the moral equivalent of fascism, which is obviously absurd, but like that's an opinion.
Communo-fascism. Do you see that James Lindsay clip? Or do you know that guy?
I've heard of him on Twitter. Like he's like a neoliberal idiot, right?
He's one of the critical race theory fearmonger guys, and he was on an interview with Glenn Beck, and he started talking about Genghis China had fascism with communism inside of it, so it was communo-fascism. And then the dialectical opposite of that was communism with fascism inside it, so fascio-communism. It's like just bizarre shit. But like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of different spaces that are just like so far divorced from being able to be communicated that it's like a waste of time. But definitely like a broader ideological support at like any level, just something where like you can start a conversation about socialism, as opposed to them being like, you're like, you know, you're literally Hitler. Like something like that in a broad sense is definitely ideal. So I hear you for sure.
Yeah, like regarding people like that, I think there's two different kind of subjects we can look at when it comes to how to, I don't know, make them open to like, you know, leftist ideas. Is there's the people who are already programmed, in which case it's more about like harm reduction. And then there's the people you want to like vaccinate so they're immune to that right-wing bullshit. So like a lot of people who aren't indoctrinated in the first place, those are the people, which I think is the majority of the population. I think the majority of the population, they might be like, everyone is subtly under the influence of propaganda, but most people, from like just people I meet and stuff, and based on like voting data, like half the country doesn't vote in America, 40% of the country doesn't vote in Canada. A lot of people just aren't that political. So people like that you can influence a lot easier than like someone who's already a committed Ben Shapiro watcher. You know, when those people are like, you know, it's a matter of not making them fascists, if that makes sense. And then maybe they'll come around. And then there's some people who will try to like tail the right-wing sentiments and appeal to the far right. And I have very mixed opinions on that. I'm not against reaching out to Trump supporters in principle, like, but there's a technique that some people do, which I know you're critical of, these type of people who they'll use almost like, you know, like the patriotic socialist types, the people who will say, oh, I'm a nationalist and a socialist. And they'll maybe even adopt like anti-race
reactionary politics about race and gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
I mean, the patriotic socialists, I haven't like looked that much into it. I know there's like Hinkle and Haas, but I see that as like a pure grift almost. Like it seems like based on like the reactionary nature of like the back and forth, but they have like
Greenwald. How could I forget? Yeah,
Glenn
Greenwald's also like that. Yeah, like
that's
they pretend to be conservatives and they do this like fucking weird thing where it's
is that horseshoe theory? Is that what that is? Or not really?
I don't think so. I think that's just tailism, like the idea
tailism,
of pandering, you know, you're basically watering down your politics to attract the most like backward parts of the population. And I mean, sorry, that's just the reality, you know, is because if you're at the point where you're like buying into like anti-vax talking points just to appeal to Trump supporters, are you really, you know, Jimmy Dore is like this too. It's like, are they really persuading right-wingers, or are they making right-wingers like them?
Growing an audience demographic. It's antithetical to making your content more successful if you find an audience, and then if you talk about certain things in a certain way, it'll make them happy, it'll make them keep coming back, it'll boost your stuff in the algorithm. And it's really kind of, I don't know, it like that's never been something that I've considered, and I think probably a lot of the creators you talk to will have a similar feeling. Actually, I don't know how active that thinking is, like how active the being beholden to your audience like process in the actual creation, how like intertwined those are. I mean, the examples you gave, like a Jimmy Dore type, it's clearly
I don't have that problem, and yeah, but some do, a lot do, like a lot of especially the people who are, label themselves in very specific terms.
Yeah,
or if they
yeah.
just have like a certain type of content, like if they have a certain type of thing where it's like, oh, if all the content is bashing Democrats or bashing
for sure
Republicans, that's become a brand, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the like anarchist ML thing, I remember we talked, that was like maybe 4 months ago, when I was like, do you label yourself anything? And you're like, don't do that shit. And I'm so glad I talked to you about that when I did, because it's weird that like having ideological grounding for your stuff is most of the time a good thing, but when it intertwines with the content and when it intertwines with the online audiences, you get whatever person, let's say an anarchist that has a bunch of anarchist followers, someone will say a wild take that sounds good to that kind of crowd, and then it'll get boosted up. It's no different than like someone, not to compare anarchists with like a Vosh community person, but someone in that community that will say something that's kind of wild and out there, but it's like, ooh, that's like a cool take. Like that's something that we all like, we all get, and it makes us either feel really good or feel like vindicated or whatever. And then that grows like kind of, not regressive, but ideas that are just not more generally accepted, because it's like echo chamber shit. And it's the same with literally any online community, but especially when it comes to creating content, I can see how antithetical that is, or how easily it would be to get swept up in that, wanting to maybe not actively, but like placate to a certain audience. And I guess especially as a growing creator, as like a smaller creator, I could see that too. And I don't know, it's I'm glad you brought that up when you did, because I don't know, like, not that I would have like chosen one thing, but I definitely felt a pressure to like new leftists.
Yeah, because
like there's a certain,
right, they have the thing in the bio, right? MLM, anarchist, libcom, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like, obviously doesn't mean one has to have like no principles and whatnot. I mean, if anyone who watches my videos can kind of tell, like, I'm basically like a communist and lean towards the Marxist side. Like, I'm very much more of a Marxist than an anarchist. But at the same time, I don't choose labels for two reasons. There's also the branding, so that like I don't want to only have Marxists watching me, or I want to have everybody, potentially watch me. Like, I don't want to alienate like other leftists and only attract people who like the same thing, because I want to influence people. Like, I want to bring people new perspectives. And the other thing is psychological, because at the same time, I don't want to put myself in a mental box, because, I think it's really healthy to engage in these different tendencies. There isn't, like, for example, like Marxism, Leninism, there's many interesting things it offers, and there's many problems with it. So many things that anarchism offers too. Many anarchist thinkers can, like, I'm not an anarchist, but one of my favorite thinkers is David Graeber, right? A lot of people who maybe, I don't know, who are like strict Marxist Leninists might be opposed to reading someone like him because they're an anarchist. And I think that's just silly, and a lot of anarchists I've seen who are opposed to reading Lenin. And I think
I've seen that sentiment a lot. I don't know what that is. I was just talking to somebody about that. It seems like a weird kind of, is it an in-group thing, or is it like a
totally
just like it's not worth reading that, because like anytime I see a take like that, I'm like, that's a little weird, telling people not to like anti-intellectualism, basically. Like, that seems odd, like in service of having the good ideology. I don't think that's that common, but I've seen it enough. I've seen enough from people that are not like random people. So yeah.
And also, when one labels themselves, they also put a big frame. Like, think of, think kind of like the ideology one takes, if the one takes a very specific ideology, it's almost like a software you're putting on your brain. If your brain's like a computer and you're in only one software. And so you're going to be, even if you do read things from other tendencies, you're going to read them with a very one-sided biased lens. So you might like read what they want to see and discredit what they don't want to see. And there's that kind of way of reading it. Whereas I know it's stereotypical, but like, to be a little bit open-minded about this stuff, because sometimes the answers to a lot of these questions we face, as you get further down the pipeline, the more questions you have as a leftist, like the more you realize you get into the history stuff. Okay, why did past movements fail? You start to look, it's straightforward. Like my next podcast after this one is about why the Soviet Union fell. And it's a very not straightforward thing. There's so many factors. It's so complicated. And like none of the tendencies, in my opinion, fully capture everything. And that's why what are theories? They're conceptual tools. If one takes a theory as a religion, it's not a tool anymore. It's a fucking identity.
Yeah.
And we need to treat them as tools. Like, to like, how is this useful? And so that's kind of how I see it. Now, to go for a very completely rough, unrelated transition back to what we were saying before.
Yeah, no, I took the tangent away, so just do it.
Oh, no, it's cool. Is sort of to bring this all back to the main topic, supposedly, of the podcast, which I might title it, and that is how to radicalize normies. And, that's a loaded term, but that's like a serious question people ask, because I noticed the further down people get in the theory rabbit hole, I don't say that in a negative way. Everybody goes through rabbit holes, but when people get really educated, they read Marx, Lenin, blah 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 blah. They get really into like the big questions, and they forget that like most people haven't even got to the surface of this stuff, and you get out of touch. Right at an extreme, you have people like communists talking about, oh, well, don't you agree with Mao's condemnation of Khrushchev's revisionism? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, most people hear that and they'll be like, it sounds like,
get out of my house, bro. Like,
yeah, it sounds so out of touch. And it's such a thing too. It gets so down the pipeline that there's a lot of, if you've thought that some of the, ML YouTubers might be like out of touch, you have seen nothing yet. Like there's some like academics who, they won't even approach YouTube because they think YouTube is like, oh, it's bourgeois, blah, blah, blah. And it's, they adopt this kind of like, I'm too above these plebs. And I think that's so stupid. We need to, have an attitude to make this accessible. And that means, when I say normies, I don't really actually believe in like the normie idea. Like, there's the NPC. I don't really believe that because, people have like their different things, their different experiences. So I just identify normie as just someone who's like, maybe not political, right? Neither like left, neither right, just kind of grilling, like probably most of us probably.
I love the grilling example. People just want to grill. It's like,
I just find that so funny.
Yeah.
I prefer grill pill over NPC. Like the grill pill is a better meme than the NPC in my opinion, because it's like more accurate.
Yeah, 100%.
Because political people can totally be NPCs. They can totally be bots. Whereas the regular person, I think, just like they're just doing normal stuff. Like, and I've had friends who have been completely non-political. They're just like allergic to it. Political film, allergic, but I've seen some people completely transition rapidly. But I'm still curious to this day, how does that happen? And I'm sure you've had developed a lot of opinions on this, given the space you're in and your own experience. How do we radicalize les normies?
Yeah, I don't really, I'm not like that well versed in this specific question. I know like just one example off the top of my head. One of my friends started showing another friend some more news videos, like Cody Johnston, and they got someone who was like apolitical to slightly right leaning to be like way more open to leftism, and like someone who would probably call themselves a leftist. And so I view that question of how do we radicalize people through a lens of like content, really. And so it ties back into LeftTube and sort of sharing ideas in a manner that's acceptable, palatable, like depending how entertaining it is, like on a spectrum of like where the entertainment stops and the actual like sort of substance comes in, there's like a spectrum. Usually the best people have the dial all the way both ways in terms of like really getting to the meat of like what someone might believe and challenging that and then pulling them out of that. And so like it doesn't even have to be challenging someone who's like far right. It's just like presenting something that everyone hears about. And I'm trying to think of some examples. I guess like an H-Bomber Guy climate change video is good in the sense that a lot of people, I think it's probably not that many people, but like people that are maybe not climate denialists, but are sympathetic to that. And like, yeah, I guess where I was going with that, I don't like, I feel like I don't have that firm of an answer to this question, which sucks because it's like it's basically kind of the space that I'm in terms of my content. But I'm trying to think of an angle that I could talk about this potentially about my own perceptions, because
maybe like the type of people to target, or who are more, or different types of people who might be more predisposed to different frames, and like the type of framing of the content that can be palatable to them. Because I think like how one is receptive to leftist ideas depends on their type of their journey, their personality, their moral structure. I think that's a big one. And the second one is the other one is for sure like the presentation of the content. Because there's gamers, right? Like there's a reason why the right was so obsessed with like tapping into the gamers. That was, and I think it's no coincidence that also a lot of the self-improvement types, that's been an arena to Trojan horse right-wing ideas.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, where is that for the left? Like, because we need our strategies to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think like you could look to, I think one aspect of comedy, so things that makes things funny, is it generally, I mean, there's right-wing comics, of course. There's right-wing YouTube comedians, of course. But like,
no, there isn't.
Right. There isn't.
As right-wing comedy.
They will have that in their bio, but just nothing about it is funny. It's just like punching down on minorities. And so like there are certain just truths to comedy that either punches up or that is subversive that I think like a lot of people are more willing to get behind. So the average normie that like maybe like if you found like a NPC guy that was like generated NPC. Like walked out of like a 3D printer and then was just like the first thing he looks at is what he's gonna, or not the first, like he's just like middle of the road, like straight middle of the road. Like I think that person will probably be predisposed to like an entertaining, funny video that's like that like kind of speaks to like liberation or like that points out injustice and says like this is fucked up because people understand that. If the person is predisposed to being like someone who wants to maintain like a system of domination, which I think maybe probably a lot of like, I guess like Americans just lean that way by nature of like their upbringing or their material status or whatever. But like, I think like there are certain elements of like leftism that are more appealing and there's a certain truth to them. Like, I mean, we say like the statistics are, for the most part on our side. Like, I don't think that's something that's disputed. Like so much of what goes into right-wing content is like pure deception. Like you're just literally taking things, misconstruing them and building audiences off of that and getting people to like tapping into the core of their like fears and their anger against immigrants, minorities, like things like that. And that ultimately is deception. And so if you can untangle that, and that's what all the best like left content people do, then I think there's like way more people out there that are going to be like on the side of like, we care about people and we want to improve the material status of every individual. And, I think that that's definitely way more compelling for the average person than like maintaining, like it takes like a certain level of fear rhetoric to, I think, speak to a lot of these people. Or like, it's like, oh, like the kind of pipeline of the gamer guy was like, you know, you're a white guy that has a shitty life. Well, it's because of this, this, and this. And it's like easy scapegoats for your own frustrations. And it's not like that still doesn't happen. Obviously it does. But like there's a whole other side of it.
Scapegoats are powerful, man. Because the thing with the right is the problem with the right is that they provide very easy solutions and scapegoats to world's complex problems. Whereas the problems with the left is we have a problem simplifying things precisely because it's not simple. Right? Is like
right.
The advantage with the right is they can make shit up. The disadvantage with the left is that it's hard to tell the truth because the truth is complex and like super multifaceted. So it's like, yeah, of course we should tell the truth and we want to tell the information, but we also need to simplify it. And that's always the challenge.
Yeah,
right?
100%. Yeah, that's a great point. I guess like I have trouble because I was at one point a normie, but obviously my journey is motivated further than what the average person will have because I kind of always wanted to be into content and just like recently really getting into watching and learning more.
Because, you know, you might start out wanting to be more political and be more predisposed to that. Whereas it's harder. There's some people who are completely zooped out of the matrix. Like, let's be real. Like there's some people who all they do is consume stuff like maybe watching like reality TV, sports, music, whatever it is. Doesn't even have to be like it's not always like necessarily a bad thing. In many ways, I actually prefer the uninformed over the misinformed. Right? Yeah. So, but the more I think the angle is just that like the uninformed are just easier to persuade than someone who's like, I don't know, like a fucking fully radicalized Republican 60-year-old, you know.
Yeah.
Those are the hardest.
You got to cut your losses at some point. So totally it's a losing battle at a certain point.
So I have a term for that. I call it corporate communism. Corporate communism destroys small businesses in America. And I have a very good example from my district. They destroy the small businesses and the corporations gain all the control and they can't be defeated. Corporate communism, corporate communism, corporate communism.
Noah, it's great having you on. And I'd appreciate if we do a part 2 with alcohol.
I'm down.
Yes, most definitely. But for now, it was fantastic having you on. Some people listening to this might have already heard of Noah. If you haven't, definitely check out his channel. Appreciate you coming on. And most importantly, I really appreciate you shouting me out in your video that blew up your channel. Any last words you have for the One Dime Radio podcast?
Thanks for having me on. And I'll see you when I see you. And we're both fucked up.
If you enjoyed this podcast and are a regular listener of One Dime Radio and a viewer of the One Dime channel, please consider supporting One Dime on Patreon. Links in the description. Patrons get access to exclusive podcasts. Recently, we did a podcast on whether the Soviet Union was really socialist. An age-old debate, and we give a lot of nuance to it in this exclusive podcast. This is the type of content you can only get by becoming a patron. And you also get to support the channel, and get your name on the credits of all my videos. Thank you so much to all of my lovely patrons who have supported me so far. Peace out!